So welcome everyone. We are going to begin today's session. This is a crisis support session for the devastating impact of the COVID crisis in India this week and over the last few weeks. So I hope everyone is in the right virtual space. My name is Farah and I am a clinical social worker and I work at the LightHouse, which is a mental health clinic located in Dubai. And we're here today as I've said, because of the crisis, but before we even start speaking about what will be covered in today's session, I really want everyone, all of us, there's more than 400 of us gathered here today virtually, to take a moment to take 3 big, deep breaths to just honor anything that you may be feeling in your body as we are sitting with the news of over 1 million cases in just 1 week in India, and that every 4 minutes someone has died, someone's mother, brother, sister, uncle, friend, or colleague. And I know that so many of us and so many of you who have joined today are so deeply impacted by this. So I want us to take a moment to close our eyes together. I will do this with you, and I want us to take 3 deep breaths. So in through your nose, out through your mouth. And we will get started. So I am going to share my screen with you, and just some housekeeping. I want you to know that everything that I say today today's session will be recorded and it will be shared with you if you would like to reference back to it. Okay. So what we're going to be speaking about today is when devastating trauma like this, a series of relentless trauma takes place, what is normal to be feeling in our mind, in our body, and our soul, in our thoughts? What's normal to be feeling? What I'm going to share with you, nothing fixes or takes away the pain that you may be experiencing, but it's more of a guide of what's normal to feel. How do I navigate this terrain when everything feels so overwhelming and confusing and upsetting? How do I guide this enormous wound that I feel inside of me? So we'll be speaking about that. And I'm also going to be speaking to you about some tips and tools of what you should be doing during this time and what you do not want to be doing, and how you can also support others. I'm also going to speak specifically about what is grief and how that may be impacting how you're feeling, your family, your friends, your workplaces, and the larger community. So what are the things that we should be saying to others to support them? And what are the things that we should not be saying to ourselves and to others? And I want you to know that when devastating trauma like this takes place, and I know that it has touched all of you in different ways and may still be impacting you as the situation is really ongoing, that when trauma like this takes place, it's like a big open wound inside of us, but it's an invisible one. So on the news, we see the numbers, we see the pictures, we've all seen the videos. Some of you may actually be there and still experiencing this now. This is the stuff we can see on the outside. What we cannot see is the invisible injury that all of the trauma is, how it's impacting us. So you can see it's kind of like you may be walking around and functioning and talking, but there's a really big injury inside. And we call this an acute stress reaction, right? It happens in response to trauma, and it's a psychological injury. And there's no way to fast track this. You know, people will always say to me, how do I stop feeling this way? How do I get back to normal? How do I heal as quickly as possible? And I want you to know there's no quick way. There's no quick fix to this, right? It's going to be really important that you're being patient with yourself and with your loved ones, and that you're allowing yourself to feel everything that may be coming up. Okay. So I want you to know who can be impacted by this invisible injury. So you may have had a recent death, a loss, someone who may have died to COVID. Maybe they were not able to get medical treatment. Maybe they were. It may be that you are currently living with COVID, you've tested positive, or you have a loved one who is currently tested positive. It's really anyone who may be living inside of India right now as this is happening, but it also includes people who are living outside of India who are connected. You have family there, home there, friends there, or memories there. You can also be impacted with this invisible injury. And the same is true from seeing the images, the videos, and hearing stories of what people are going through. That can also cause this invisible injury inside of us. Okay? You can also experience this, as I know that many of us have recently read, there's going to be a lockdown until the end of May. And so not being able to connect or enter India to be with family or to reach them also can cause that injury. And the same is true for many people who may be stuck there right now and saying, I cannot leave and get back to safety or where family and friends are. Okay. Reading the news can also trigger this invisible wound. And I see some people are raising their hands. I will say that I'm going to speak for about 35, 40 minutes. So please hold your questions until the end of the session, and we will have a time for you to process that. Okay. I want you to know that right now, each person's reaction, how you may be thinking, feeling, or behaving, is as unique as your fingerprint. So there's really no right or wrong way to be feeling right now. And I always find that there can be almost like three buckets of how people respond. And some people may be feeling very reactive, or we call hypervigilant, where you may be feeling really anxious, very tearful, very irritable, very angry, a lot of feelings, right? It's almost like everything's coming out. You may be having really big reactions to even smaller things in your life right now. It's like your bandwidth is so much smaller to cope with things. Now, so the reaction can go outward, and for some people the reaction can almost implode inside, where you may feel quite frozen or paralyzed, numb or empty. And other people can become extremely functional. And these people usually get labeled as a strong one. They may be taking care of paperwork, trying to get resources to people in the country and loved ones. They may be starting funds. They may be taking care of paperwork. They get very functional. And usually we think that person is the strong one. It's not that they are the strong one, it's that they're just really functional right now. And usually that type of individual will have more of a delayed reaction to how they're feeling. Now, you may be saying, I can identify with all three of these. There's been moments where you're feeling really anxious and reactive, and other times frozen inside, and other times very functional. There's no right or wrong way to do this. There's no one single map that I can give to you and say, this is what you can expect from what you're going through right now. So I want to now take an even closer look at what's normal for yourself and others to be feeling and thinking during this time. So some people may be feeling a lot of fear and anxiety, right? Which is what's going to happen, jumping to the worst case scenario, right? Because the worst case scenario, many people are living through that nightmare, right? And so whether you have been directly impacted by what's happening or not, there can be a lot of fear around what else is going to go wrong, what else may happen in the world. Because many of us, we tend to have this invincibility bubble where we know that bad things can happen, but we don't think that they'll happen to us, and not like this, right? So you can be moving around the world feeling a lot less safe. Like, what if something like that happens in other places? What if my family's not able to get medical care. Or if you've even lost someone, you may be thinking, what if I lose someone else? Or what if that happens to me? So the mind now has this template of trauma, and there can be more fear that something bad may happen again. Right? I need you to know that doesn't mean that you're being negative or you're being crazy or you need to stop that. That is a very understandable response to trauma, where the threat system in your body becomes hyper aroused, right? It's detecting threat everywhere. Sometimes I describe it like, if you could see almost like a home alarm system that is extremely sensitive, or even just the wind goes past that home alarm system and it starts going off, and you're thinking, what's happening here? That's what happens inside of us after trauma takes place. That even small things like getting a message, getting a phone call late in the night, and you're thinking something bad must have happened, and the entire home system in your body starts going off. Heart starts racing, stomach gets upset, exhaustion, struggling to concentrate. I need you to know that doesn't mean you're losing it or you're going crazy. That is a very understandable and common reaction to trauma. Now, some people may feel really numb, like I feel nothing at all. I feel indifferent, right? There can be a lot of sadness or tearfulness. Many people may be feeling guilt. I should have done this differently, or I wish I did this differently, or I wish I said I love them more, or I wish I had, I don't know, gotten vaccinated earlier or not vaccinated. There can be a lot of guilt and anger, and I know, and I really want to highlight anger, as I've had so many clients and community members saying, I'm so angry, this shouldn't have happened. I feel like the situation is being mishandled by leadership and the country, right? So there can also be a lot of anger over how the situation has been handled as well. Okay, I need you to know that's also very common. There may be a sense of panic or even disbelief, like, or what we call disassociation. And what that means is when it's like, is this a dream? Is this real? Is this really happening? This can't be happening. You may even feel like you're having an out of body experience, right? Like you're outside your body watching yourself or watching the country. That is what we call disassociation. And that is actually one way that your brain defends you from how overwhelming the pain is. It's like, this just can't be real, right? Again, that is a common trauma reaction. There may even be a sense of being betrayed, and that may be a sense with even leadership in the country and saying, I feel betrayed. I feel let down. How was it handled this way? It shouldn't have happened. You may also feel very overwhelmed. And when I say overwhelmed, ultimately the emotion of overwhelmed means feeling so many different emotions all at once that you're feeling overwhelmed. And some people may feel empty or frozen, or they may say, I just feel nothing, I feel dead inside. That is also a common trauma reaction. And again, you may notice you're like, wow, I've been on a roller coaster of these emotions, right? And some may resonate with you less than others. Now, cognitively in our mind, trauma reorganizes our brain, right? Especially this frontal lobe in our brain. So you may feel quite foggy. You may find it hard to concentrate. You may notice that your thoughts are quite preoccupied in thinking about what's happening now, what's going to happen next, are my loved ones okay? You may be rethinking if there were specific traumatic events, they may be looping in your mind. This is also a common response to trauma and or an acute stress reaction, right? And you may see those racing thoughts as well. Again, if you're feeling this way, the most common thing I hear people say is, I feel like I'm going crazy. I don't feel like myself. And that is because there's this invisible injury. And I would say, with what's happening in India, it's not even just one injury, right? It can feel like 1,000 cuts. It's people that are dying, it's healthcare, it's medical supplies, it's the system. There's so many things that are happening that it's not just one injury, it's many injuries, some bigger than others and some smaller than others. Okay. And sometimes, if you, a really good visual that I like is that when trauma is fresh with what's happening, if you could see your heart and soul or your insides, you would need to be in the ICU, right? And when someone is in the ICU, you would not, and remember, I'm talking about the invisible injury. I know we all have so many images of people wanting to be in the hospital or in the hospital right now, that the invisible injury of trauma is if you could see your heart and soul, you would need to be in the ICU. And you would never say to someone in the ICU, it's time to move countries, it's time to move house, it's time to quit my job or change my relationship. That a really important part of healing when trauma is fresh is pain management. How do I just make sure that I'm managing the pain and the distress that I'm feeling inside my body? Because emotional pain is just as real and valid as physical pain, right? So when we do certain scans on the human brain, you'll find that the same pain centers light up when we feel sad, empty, hurt, as when we're feeling physical pain. So it's very accurate. Okay? So physically, you may be experiencing a heaviness in your chest. I've had people say to me, I feel like there's an elephant sitting on me, or a weight, or a stone, or a knot in my fist in my throat, or a heaviness in my stomach. You know, it's very physical as well. You may feel oversensitive to certain noises or light, where things around you feel really overwhelming. And for many people, I'll hear them say, I just can't relate to my friends right now. If you have friends who are not impacted, who may be worried about different daily stressors, and you're thinking, I can't, I don't care. And I don't, some people, many people will say, I don't even care about work right now. I'm so overwhelmed. Right? I need you to know that is a understandable and common response to trauma. You may have an upset stomach, headaches, racing heart, blood pressure may be higher, muscle aches, and there can also be disrupted sleep, and sometimes people will even have nightmares. Okay? Now, behaviorally, you may want to withdraw or isolate yourself or feel a bit detached in your relationships. And some people can even, you can notice some changes in speech. Okay. I also want to name some spiritual changes that may be happening inside of you right now. So many people may be wondering, why? How do I make sense of this? How does this make sense? Right? I don't have any answers to that. But what I will say is that that is a common response to trauma. And I would say do not rush to try and answer these questions, but allow yourself to feel them. There may be a loss of meaning. So some people may lean into faith and find, or spirituality, and find a lot of comfort and strength. And other people may lean away and feel angry and frustrated and lost. And in my experience, it's usually a mix of both, like all of these things. And it can feel like a bit of a roller coaster where you may have moments of feeling like, okay, I feel hopeful. It's going to be okay. Help is on the way and somehow, some way. And then there may be other moments where you feel completely hopeless. Like, how did this happen? And when will it ever get better? Especially when all of you, I know all of you who have attended today have been having a pretty rough year even before, right? And it's been such a roller coaster of hope and hopelessness that this pandemic will get better. I don't think anyone was expecting this to be happening in India. Is just unbelievable, right? And so there may be quite a questioning of beliefs or questioning why. I would encourage you not to rush yourself to answer these questions, but to just observe them and sit with them. If you have friends and family members saying, why did this happen? Or I'm angry, or I don't know if I believe anymore, do not try to answer those questions. Do not try to solve them. Really importantly will be to just listen and offer solidarity. Okay. So I now want to speak about what is important for you to be doing right now with how immediate this trauma and traumas really are. And so importantly, we live in such an emotion phobic culture, right? So most of us, I know for me, growing up in a Pakistani American household, no one talked about feelings, right? No one said, how are you feeling? No one said mental health. It's a very common experience, but it's so important, especially with trauma, that you feel your feelings, right? Feelings are not meant to be thought through, they're meant to be felt, right? So I want to get super practical with this. So imagine you're sitting somewhere and you feel a wave of sadness, and you feel so sad that so many people have died, and maybe someone you love or care about has died, and you feel a wave of sadness. Letting yourself feel it would look like this for even 3 minutes. Wow, what am I feeling right now? Where am I feeling? What is this emotion? You say, is it sadness? Is it anger? Is it betrayal? And you're like, okay, I feel sad. Where do you feel it in your body? And you may say, I feel it in my heart. It feels so heavy. It feels like my heart is just sinking to the floor. Okay, what color is it? If what you were feeling, if this sadness were a painting, what would it look like? Would it be dark or melting? Or that curiosity and that acknowledgement is you feeling the feeling. Even tears can be you feeling the feeling. It's like, imagine feelings like a teapot, like the pressure rising. We have to let the steam out. The same is true with our feelings. When you do not feel them, it's like putting debt on a credit card. It doesn't just go away or dissipate, it stays within your body. And this is true with difficult emotions, but especially with trauma. The body keeps score. So work on feeling your feelings when you're ready to, when it feels safe to, and that can literally be 10 seconds, 1 minute, 3 minutes. You can do it alone, or you can do it with someone that you love, okay? Or of course with a counselor if that made sense for you. Now, I want you to know that there's no right or wrong way to feel. Okay, so really commonly post trauma, and as you're living through the trauma, many people will say things like, am I not crying enough? Does that mean I don't care? Or should I be more angry? Or should I be feeling more? There's no right or wrong way to feel, right? So each person's reaction will be so unique to you. So I encourage you not to judge what you're feeling. And really, when trauma is fresh, it's the most important thing for you right now and your loved ones is just taking it day by day. We have no idea what's coming, and if the day feels too overwhelming, then it's taking it hour by hour, which would be, what do I need to do today? What do I need to get done, or what do I need to do in the next 30 minutes is really important. And that's going back to, when trauma is fresh, it's about pain management. You wouldn't say to someone in the ICU, well, tell me about your plan for next week and the week after, and what are you going to do and how are you going to get it done? They're going to be like, I'm just trying to survive this hour right now. And this is so important, because just because you may not have a visible injury doesn't mean there is an invisible injury. And I'm here to say, I need you to acknowledge what's happening inside of you as well. It's so important. And really to go back to the basics. So the number one priority right now, as trauma and traumas are fresh, is to just survive. So that means going back to doing your best to sleep, even though sleep may be disrupted, trying to be protective of your sleep, having a routine around it, drinking water, making sure you're eating even if you're not hungry, and some type of movement. That's it. These are the number one priorities: sleep, water, movement, food, right? And do no harm. These are like the number one priorities when trauma is fresh. And what I mean by do no harm, I think I get to this on the next slide, but do no harm means do not have caffeine right now. I'm just gonna go, I think it's already that, yeah. So do not have caffeine right now as you're feeling anxious. If you are, caffeine, tea, chai, coffee, soda, dark chocolate, Red Bull, all of these things exacerbate anxiety and they make it worse. So no caffeine right now. Other things would be you want to avoid drugs or alcohol, especially alcohol is a depressant. So it will leave us more with a low or flat feeling. So you want to avoid that right now. Another thing that's important is if you have experienced a specific trauma or incident or a loss, do not feel forced to talk about it. That's so important. Loved ones or friends mean well, and they may say, "What happened? Tell me what happened, or what's happening there, or what did you see, or what did you hear?" You can actually tear at the wound if you relive the details if you don't want to. If you want to talk about it, then it's okay, right? But do not feel forced to share the details about what you're going through, okay? A part of you may want to isolate yourself, and I'll say, I want you to try to avoid that urge, right? Have at least one or two people that you're close to, and just keep the lines of communication open, because we are innately social creatures. We cannot go at this alone, right? You also want to avoid blocking out your feelings, and I've already named why. Now, when trauma is fresh, and this trauma is fresh, it's also important that you try to avoid making big life decisions. And many of you may be saying, well, I have to get my family out of there, or maybe we need to move, or we can't keep living like this, or what's going to happen. These are all true, and I'm not arguing that. What I am saying is that when there's this enormous invisible injury, it is an enormous extra load to put on someone to say, now we need to move countries, or now we need to change this, or now we need to do this. So please be cautious and try to avoid any huge life decisions. And if you do, give yourself a little bit more time to allow that wound to come together. And ideally you get help with it, right? You don't go at it alone. Even when we've recovered and a wound comes back together, we still must be cautious as we're adjusting to life, right? So how do you know if you need to get extra support or professional support with a counselor? And I would say that there's still so many injuries, right? This is a unique situation where it's not one trauma, it's several, and family members and communities. It's like, it feels like a wildfire, really. Someone keeps, like, I keep reading in the news, they say a wave, second wave, third wave of, it feels like a tsunami, really. I think wave is too benign a word to use right now. But if you find that this inner wound that you're feeling gets bigger and bigger, for example, you're saying, I'm still not sleeping, I can't concentrate at all, I feel so angry that it's interrupting my relationships now, or my physical health, and you notice this gets increasingly worse, you want to reach out for support. This is if you notice it in yourself or in a loved one, right? If you notice that you're having suicidal thoughts, that is a mental health crisis, right? That person, you or that person, your loved one, will need extra support. Or if you notice you're having panic attacks. So panic attacks are the most extreme form of anxiety, and they feel like a heart attack, right? Like they come on often suddenly, they can be triggered by something, they sometimes come completely out of nowhere, and it feels like you're dying, okay? So a lot of the times we have clients who go to, they go get medical help, and the doctor says, you're just stressed, right? But actually it was a panic attack. That means check in with professional support. Okay? If you notice you're using an increasing amount of alcohol or drugs, substances, or certain behaviors to cope, that is another red flag to check in with a professional or a counselor. That's really important in yourself or in someone that you love, okay, or a team member. I now want to speak particularly about grief. Now, when we think about grief, we usually think about this in relation to death. And I am going to be speaking about grief after loss, as I know that some of the people in today's call I know, and I know that there have been losses, right? So grief is not only in relation to death, right? We also grieve other things. So there's a grief of like a loss of safety, a loss of home, a loss of um, being able to travel, a loss of rituals, a loss of ceremonies. There's so many different losses: loss of dream, loss of the future, um, loss of togetherness, loss of touch. And even when we grieve people, right? We grieve the person. So in grief work, we call this the primary loss, is the person that you've lost. And then this loss creates so many ripples. We call it the secondary losses. So for example, if you've lost a dear friend, the ripple of that would be loss of confidant, loss of father figure, loss of all of the dreams of the travel that you would have, or the togetherness, or the playfulness that person made you feel. So there's secondary losses that happen as well. Okay, so I want to talk about what's normal to be feeling if you are grieving right now, as many people are. So grief is different from mourning. Mourning is religious and cultural. It can be wearing white for a certain amount of time. It can be certain prayers. It is a period of time that begins and ends. Now, that's mourning. Grief is the internal experience of loss, and there's no end point. There is no day, year, month that comes or arrives, and you say, now I'm done grieving. And that could be a person, someone that you love, or it can be even what's happened here today. The grief of, I cannot believe this has happened to my country. Even in 20 years, in 50 years, I imagine you may, and many of us, look back and feel grief and loss that this has happened, right? That so that is grief. And I want you to know that the most defining feature of grief is that it comes in waves. It's like having your back to the ocean and never knowing when these waves may arrive or what the size of them may actually be. And wrapped in these waves are not just sadness, right? It's every emotion you can possibly think of: sadness, numbness, anger, guilt, shame, rage, anything and everything, right? And so you can imagine, for people who are grieving, you'll say, I feel like I'm losing control. One day I feel okay, and the next minute I don't feel okay. And I need you to know that doesn't mean that you are crazy or you're doing this thing, grief, wrong. That is the very nature of loss, right? All of those emotions we actually spoke about can be wrapped in grief, and there's no end point. Okay, some very common myths about grief is that you can only grieve a death. I've already named that. You can be grieving so many. It's a loss of any dream, really. Another myth is that there are set stages to grief. This is not true. Sometimes in popular culture we hear the stage model, denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance. It doesn't work that way. That stage model was actually developed for people with terminal illness. And I would argue that even with that, it's not linear. You can wave through it. There are no set stages. There are actually 4 tasks that we go through. I won't go into all of them, but I want to name 2 of them. And one of the first tasks is that we have to learn to adjust to the reality of living without that person, right? But that adjustment is not linear, right? You can have a week where you say, okay, I really feel their absence. I know that they're not here. I cannot see them, hear them. I don't hear them saying my name anymore. And then the very next day, you can say, I can't believe they're not here. I can't believe that this is happening. Right? The very nature is up and down, right? So as a grief counselor, I've always really despised this word acceptance, because acceptance means you've taken it and then you move forward. And I would argue that there's no such thing as acceptance with grief. There is only adjustment. And it is a lifelong adjustment of learning how to live without that person. Now, when grief first takes place, it's like that big open wound that we've talked about. The wound comes together and then the pain looks different, right? It feels different. Functioning returns, right? And grief does get softer with time, but it never truly finishes. I also want you to know a common myth is that time heals all wounds. Time does not heal, time passes, right? So it's a big myth. How we heal depends on how we are responding to that wound. Are you doing further harm? Are you dismissing it? Are you putting that emotional debt on the credit card? Or are you allowing yourself to feel it? with compassion. Another myth is that the pain will go away faster if you've ignored it. We've already talked about the significance of feeling your feelings. And another myth is that once you are done grieving, your life will return to normal. And that is not true. For many people, and many of you that are here today, there's a new normal that is being established, right? You will never be exactly the same as you were before this happened or before you lost your loved one. Okay. Right. So I want you to know at the Lighthouse, we are the home to the only grief center in the region. It's called the Ramey Grief Center, and the Lighthouse was actually birthed to support this center. And if you have lost someone, someone has died, we offer one free grief consultation. And that is a session with a therapist like myself, where we talk about what grief is, what it's not, your loss, how to care for yourself. And that free session is also a gateway into our grief support sessions, our group ones that we have throughout the year. And these are also free. So we have grieving during COVID, motherless daughters, an adult grief support group, which is a mix of losses, pregnancy and infant loss. We also have surviving to loss after suicide. And you can find more information on these groups on our social media or on our website. Okay. So, how to support others. And so I'm going to speak for about 5 more minutes, and then we're going to have about 20 minutes for questions, comments, reactions together. So, the most important thing in supporting others with trauma and loss during this time is not what you say. And I always think of Maya Angelou's quote, which she said, people will forget what you said, although I hope you don't forget everything I said today, but people will forget what you said, but they will not forget how you made them feel. And with trauma and grief, we do not search for fixes, advice, or solutions. We're searching for solidarity. It's like when you approach someone you love and say, I don't even know what to say, but I'm going to walk alongside you. It's like companioning, right? So what you do not want to do if you are supporting a team member, a loved one, and even yourself is rush towards trying to fix how they're feeling. And this can be trying to give them advice. They say, I'm so sad. I feel awful. And you're like, okay, what can I do to make it better for you? Like, well, look on the bright side, or it's going to be over soon, or that's you trying to fix their feeling, right? We don't want to do that. It's more about being with it. And I'm going to give you some very specific questions and statements that will help you do that. When trauma is fresh, do not expect loved ones or friends to reach out to you. You want to reach out to them. Okay. Do not force them to share details. And if someone is crying, allow them to cry, right? Because crying is actually a healthy release. So even in our in our counseling offices, like the tissue box will be next to you, but I will never hand you the tissues because not because I'm not, kind, but it's when you hand someone the tissues, you're saying, stop crying. And I'm saying it's okay for you to cry. It's actually more concerning when I'm like, well, what's going on there if you're feeling nothing, right? Although everyone grieves differently. Do not limit the time. It's okay for people to grieve. So, someone may want to speak to you about what's happening in their life, in their family, in their community several times, not just this week, but next week, even in the coming months or years, right? Allow them the space to speak about it if you have the energy and you're okay to. And remember, anytime we're supporting others, you cannot support someone else unless you're okay first. If you're not okay, or you're depleted, or you're unwell, then you are not in the position to support someone else. And I'll expand on that a bit further. But also, when trauma is fresh, do not take people's reactions personally. They may have outbursts of anger or sadness, or there may be withdrawing. Know that that is a common response to trauma. Now, all feelings are okay, but not all behaviors, right? So it's not okay if they're like being violent with you in any way. That's not okay. So the things you do not want to be saying, be strong, It could be worse. Calm down. Stop crying. Everything's going to be okay. You cannot say everything's going to be okay when everything feels not okay, right? So these are not, they're like false platitudes, really. Any statement that begins with at least is dismissive and it is not empathic. So at least you had some time together, or at least he lived, as long as he did, or at least he did not suffer, or these are not helpful statements. Okay. If there's been a loss, you also do not want to say things like, oh, they're in a better place now. That's not helpful. Even though most people say this, it's again a statement where you're trying to fix their grief. And that's not helpful, right? Because even if cognitively they believe this religiously and they say, okay, they're in a better place right now, in that moment, as they are grieving, that doesn't fix what they're feeling. The grief remains, right? And you never want to say things like, be thankful for what you have, because gratitude and suffering do not compete. You can be the most grateful person and say, I'm so thankful for the resources that I have. I'm thankful for, being healthy, or many of our family members are okay, or you can be thankful and also acknowledge that you are suffering. We can hold both. You can hold both. And that's actually a sign of a lot of emotional maturity, when you can hold both, right? Right. So other way, now let's look at the things you want to be doing. So offer solidarity through listening, any practical support. So asking people, what can I do to help this week? Can I help take something off your plate? Can I help with any logistical work or paperwork or groceries? Can I send something? What can I do? Where can I donate? So being quite practical is often helpful, because when people are overwhelmed, it can be hard to do that practical stuff. Keep up regular caring contact with people who are impacted. That doesn't mean like harassing them like every 5 minutes, like, are you okay? No, but I'm thinking of you, every few days or so. Reach out to them, allow them to cry. And if they have experienced a loss and someone has died, make sure you ask what their loved one's name was and say their name. I can't tell you, almost 100% of the bereaved individuals I've worked with will say no one says their name anymore, right? And when you ask about their name or say their name, you're not reminding them that their loved one has died. You're reminding them that they have lived. So it's really important to say their name, ask what their name was, and and again, companion, walking alongside. So some of the things that you may say would be, I'm sure it feels hard to be in a positive to be positive in a situation like this. I can't imagine what this is like for you. Wow, I don't even know what to say, but I'm so glad you told me. I'd like to help with something specific today. Is that okay? What has this week been like for you? What has this month been like for you? Because it will change each week and month, each day sometimes even. What can we or I do to support you this month? And encouraging self-care. So you may ask them, what have you been doing to take care of yourself? Okay, so these are more empathic, supportive statements that you want to say. So before we take questions, I want you to know that we have several different social media accounts where you can ask us anonymous questions, and there are resources about mental health and feeling and well-being. So we have Dr. Saliha Afridi, who's our MD. We have Smart Heart Board Game, parenting platform, and also for teens. So you can check those out if you'd like. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'd like to spend the next really 15 minutes just answering any questions. If you'd like to share anything, you can do so anonymously in the Q&A section of the chat. Okay, and even if you don't have a question and you just like to share how you're feeling or what you're experiencing, that's okay as well. So we have someone sharing who said, hi Farah, I was in the hospital for 23 days and I almost dodged death. It was like a horror story. So I sincerely pray that this deadly virus should end. I can't even imagine, really. I can't imagine what that must have been like for you. Yeah. And so I will say is when you've survived a near death experience and the trauma of that, sometimes survivors will say, I'm just so glad I'm alive. Well, now there's the invisible injury, right? And so there can be a lot of guilt. Like, shouldn't I be thankful that I lived? I know others have died. And I'm saying you can be thankful that you lived and still allow yourself to say, I feel sad, I feel anxious, I feel hurt that this even happened to me, right? So we're still acknowledging the inner injury of what you have lived through. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. We have someone sharing that staying at home for 24 hours and not being able to go out is leading to anger and frustration, wondering whether this could become permanent or not. Yeah, because I don't know if it's every area, but my understanding is that most areas have become completely locked down now. And that is also so hard, working from home and the fear of going out and not knowing when will life return to normal. And I just want to name that most of us have been feeling this way even before this wave or the tsunami, right? So it's like, it's very understandable that there may be waves of anger, frustration, and hopelessness. And that's where I would say we feel the feeling. So you acknowledge the feeling and then also focus on day by day right now. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling hopeless. I feel it in my heart. What can I do in this hour or these next 2 hours to soothe what I'm feeling? Nothing will fix it completely, right? But what are some things that I could do that would be soothing? And soothing things are different for everyone, right? It may be movement, music, sleep, connecting, alone time. It may be meditation, it may be prayer, but searching for soothing, not fixing, is really important. And another thing, just reiterating, is to do no harm, right? So that means limiting the news, limiting caffeine, limiting even people that overwhelm you, that you're like, I just can't. Another tip is that do no harm means do not watch things or even movies or shows that feel overwhelming or triggering. That's really important as well. We can do further harm when we're actually not okay inside. Okay. We have a question. How do you get rid of these feelings when you are so scared of losing your dear and near loved one? So that's a really common thing people are feeling. So many of us are feeling. And I would say we cannot control which feelings arrive. So we cannot control that. We can only control how we choose to respond to those feelings, right? Because that fear of losing someone you love or losing someone else that you love is a very understandable reaction with what's going on, right? And so, how I would respond is acknowledging the feeling. So, I'm feeling afraid, I'm feeling anxious, I'm terrified that I may lose someone that I loved. Okay, feel the feeling. You're like, I feel it in my shoulder, my jaw is clenched, my head feels it. Okay, feel the feeling. And then I would want you to practice some grounding activities. I may lose someone that I love. No one can say that it will never happen. That may happen. It may never happen, right? What are the things that I can do in this hour that would make me feel somewhat safe, secure, and grounded? Right. So that may the quickest way, the quickest evidence-based way is breathing, deep breathing, right? Because when we're anxious and our heart's going on and the mind is racing and we feel sick to our stomach with fear, your physical body doesn't understand that you may be at home and safe. So deep breathing is actually the quickest mechanism to let your body know we're safe and we're okay right now. And something may happen to my loved one, but they're okay right now. What can I do to make myself feel a little bit safer and to soothe myself, not to solve the worry, to soothe myself because I'm not feeling okay right now. Okay. And a lot of the times that's five, I think of your five senses. So it may be a candle, it may be a shower, it may be breathing, it may be meditation, it may be talking to someone that you love. But remember, these behaviors do not solve the worry. It's just, it's more about soothing the pain, right? Because trauma is about pain management. So we have someone sharing. She said, "Why does it feel like there is no karma? Why do good things happen to bad people? All the people who have hurt me live stress-free lives. I lost my mom 10 years back. I had no one who was supportive. It feels so unfair." Thank you for sharing that feeling of unfairness, and I hear some part of you that is trying to make sense of this. Like, how does this make sense? How does so much suffering make sense? And it doesn't make sense, really, right? Okay, so I'm hearing some people sharing some soothing techniques. So someone said, I'm spending time at home and I'm playing with my 1-year old. So we have a question. You appreciated the session. Thank you. How do you proactively interact with people during these trying times? So what I would say is you use open-ended questions, right? Now, so when you do speak, number one, anytime you're connecting with someone that you love or that you care about or a colleague, always make sure you're okay first. So you want to self-attune where you're saying, where's my energy level at? Because if I'm feeling depleted, angry, overwhelmed, it's not the time to support someone else. So check in with yourself first. And if you're okay, then you want to reach out to them and let them know that you're thinking of them, right? Like, I'm thinking of you. If you'd like to talk, I'm here. And then when you do connect with people, you want to use open-ended questions. So you may say, I'm just going to make up a hypothetical name, Akshay. I don't know an Akshay. I'm just making that up. Akshay, I'm thinking about you. How have things been with you? Tell me more about what this experience is like for you. You know, we do not want to use closed-ended questions like, are you okay? No, that's not good for conversation, right? What was that like for you? How have you been feeling? Asking those open-ended questions are important. And if the person doesn't want to speak or they don't want to open up, we respect that. We respect their decision, but you let them know, if you'd like to speak, I'm here. I'm thinking of you. Right? So I have a question. What books do you recommend to read regarding grief and trauma, which can be helpful during these unprecedented time in the world? So a lot of the grief and trauma books that I like are not specific to COVID, but the one I really like is called It's Okay Not to Be Okay, right? That's a really good one. I'm just going to look up the author's name really quick. It's a really good one. Um, want you guys to know it because if you're grieving, it's a really good book. It's actually It's Okay That You're Not Okay by Megan Devine. That's a book I really, really like. And a really good children's book about grief is called The Invisible String. I really like that one too. There's another one, a grief one. It's called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. That one is also very good. So we have another comment. We had a big loss in my family where we lost our mother. My brother seems like he's withdrawing and is in guilt. How can I support him? He isn't one who talks or shares his emotions. And that's okay, right? We all grieve differently. Some people will talk and some people will not want to talk, and that's okay. What I would say is let him know that you're thinking of him, right? Let him know that you'd like to talk to him if he'd like to talk. And you may even share a resource with him about grief. So you may share a book with him. You may ask him if he'd like to have a grief consultation to just get more information. But if the loss is fresh, it may be, sometimes when it's so fresh, people are not ready to speak about it, and that's okay as well, right? And you may even say that to him. You may say, I'm making this up now, but if your brother's name was Akshay, you may say, Akshay, I'm worried about you. I know you're grieving differently. How can I support you? So asking him and seeing what he says, that's what I would recommend. So we do not share the presentation, but we will be sharing the recording of today's session with you. So by God's grace, my immediate family is safe, but there is a lot going on in my extended family and also my close friends. I'm here in Dubai and try really hard to keep my parents positive and happy with all the sad news in my extended family. What more can I do to help them? Thank you for sharing that. I will say, um, I would say try not to focus too much on making them feel positive, which you may be looking at me right now. I can't see you and being like, what? But when we think about good mental health, is not about feeling good and positive all the time, right? Good mental health is about being able to experience all of your emotions, because there's no such thing as negative feelings. All feelings are neutral. Some of them are just uncomfortable to feel. So if they're feeling sad, I would allow them to feel sad and to sit with it and be curious about, tell me more about what you're feeling and what this is like for you, and being curious together. So I would say keep doing what you're doing with like caring for them and engaging with them and connecting with them, but also allow them to feel sad. And you may even share how you're feeling, right? And say, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling worried about you guys. What can I do? What can I do to support you during this time? We don't want to dismiss feelings. That's not helpful. Yeah. But if you dismiss your own feelings and you don't usually feel them, and you're like, okay, I feel sad, how do I fix this? How do I be more optimistic? Or if you do that to yourself, then you will unintentionally do that to people that you love as well. So I would say um, working on feeling your feelings first will help you support your family and others as well. We have someone saying, I feel like leadership has failed. So we have a question. As we're all working people, is there anything, strategies or steps in place for employers or management to support us? Well, I would be curious about what you need. And I say that because with workplaces, and I say this to leadership and I say this to team members, there's no one size fits all. Some people may say, I need time off, I'm not functioning. And someone else may say, right now, work is my anchor and it feels like I need to be working right now. And so there's no one size fits all. So I encourage you to start with yourself and be curious and saying, what do I need from my work right now? Do I need more flexible hours? Do I need help with a particular project? So be curious. And if you are a leader or a manager, I would say be curious with those team members and say, I know that there's a lot going on. You may be impacted. Please let me know what we can do to support you. And then when the request comes forth is to look at it together and see how it can be accommodated. But my kind of golden rule is thinking about, for leadership to be thinking about, are we responding to mental health the same way we do to physical health when people are not okay? So your question, if somebody lost their father due to COVID, what is the way forward to relax them? The goal is not to relax, right? If you're trying to relax them, they're probably going to get angry with you. It's more about solidarity and walking alongside, right? So being there, listening, being supportive, do not try to fix will be important. I have someone shared that um, they said, I lost my very close friend um, last week. That's really hard. That's really hard. We have someone sharing that they're struggling to sleep, feeling really anxious, worried about loved ones. We have someone sharing that they're really worried about their older parents back home and that it's been hard to parent and take care of your children here because there's so much worry about your elderly parents. That's really understandable. And I hope that you're being compassionate to yourself as a parent, that it's not that you are a bad mother or father, but that this is an overwhelming invisible injury that you're carrying, as knowing, what if something happens to my parents? That's a lot. So we have someone sharing in India, most of the people don't have facilities to home quarantine themselves if tested positive, and all the government hospitals as well as private hospitals don't have beds. This is devastating. Yeah. It's almost like unimaginable, right? Like it's some kind of horror movie. We have another group member sharing, we have lost both of my parents due to COVID in a very quick time, and both my wife and I are going through the trauma and need help in understanding if the continuous heartache and the right side of my abdomen for me is due to trauma or real. For my wife, it is a lump in the throat and headache and heartache. Both your parents, wow. I'm so sorry for your loss. Um, what I will say is always rule out any underlying medical cause. So I heard you say you had some pain in your right abdomen. So definitely go to a GP and just say like, let's get this checked out. But oftentimes, like your wife's symptoms, where you say that the throat and the headache and the heartache, those are very common grief reactions, and grief can be very physical. Yeah, so I would say rule out any medical costs for that pain, but then I would also say, please reach out to us for grief consultations as well. Those are those 60-minute free of charge sessions that we have. But that's a really painful time, unimaginable. We have someone saying, when will this pandemic end? I have no idea. It's a roller coaster. We have someone sharing that she said, my mother is in ICU from the last 9 days. My whole family is positive. Now we are improving except my mother. I'm only standing with positive thinking. I hope I never lose her. Unbelievable. We have someone sharing that they're feeling like it's hard to connect with loved ones because I am away from home and they're panicking. She said, I feel less focused on work and feeling sleepy most times, and you're avoiding making contact with others, right? So, again, some of those common trauma symptoms I'm hearing. We have someone who's been quarantining for 10 days, feeling anxious, wondering when this will be over. We have someone else saying, I have lost a couple of friends due to COVID all of a sudden. Now the fear factor is increasing, right? And so again, that's that common reaction to the trauma, is that anxiety. So you feel the feeling and then practice grounding, right? So feel the anxiety, acknowledge it, allow yourself to feel it for a few minutes, be curious about it, but then also practice some soothing and grounding. What can I do in this hour or in these 3 hours to comfort or soothe myself? Yeah, but also, don't say things to yourself like, I'm crazy, I shouldn't be anxious, I should be strong, I should get over this. That actually does more harm. We had someone share anonymously, I lost 4 people in the same day. I shared it with a friend. She replied that, oh, you are so sensitive, just be strong. It made me feel pathetic and more pained. It gives such a mental trauma. How to handle these kinds of insensitive people who don't even know how to react. Oh my gosh. I am so sorry that you have lost 4 people, and then you had to experience further pain with how that friend replied. I hope that she did not, I hope that she was being ignorant in that moment. And I would say, one, if it is a close friend that you care about, I would actually name to her and say, that's not okay for you to speak to me that way or to respond to grief. You may even share some information with her on how to support someone who's grieving. Um, or even just telling her that really hurt me, right? And really commonly with people who are grieving, they'll say, I've lost friends, I've changed friends, like I don't connect with the same people anymore because they just don't understand. And I feel like it's one of those real injustices of grief. Like grief is hard enough, but then the world also misunderstands, right? And it can be a very isolating experience. So I encourage you to find your tribe of people who do understand, who are supportive, who do no further harm to you. That person, right? So I would say she's not someone you want to be around right now if that is how she's responding and continues to respond. So we have some people sharing that they've lost a job alongside during this time, which is it's making all of this even more overwhelming. And I want to name that, which is so many people are not only grieving and fearful of COVID, but there is also the devastating impact on livelihood and finances that is compounding the situation. So we have some sharing and saying, I'm working for ship owners. Most of the ship staff are from India and are subject to many mental health concerns. First being their family, leaving their family behind, and others because of the travel ban. Is there any program or advice for seafarer families or any innovative platforms for seafarers in your circle that can be introduced? I don't know of any specific program for seafarers, but one of the things that we have at the Lighthouse is called Mental Health First Aid, and that program is the equivalent of physical first aid for mental health, and it's an international program. It's in 26 different countries, and you learn how to identify and respond to depression, anxiety, addiction, suicidal thoughts, panic attacks, and the after effects of trauma. So it may be really valuable to get team members trained on how to identify the signs that they're not okay, but also to support one another. And you can find that information on our website. But there's 26 different providers globally, right? So not every, I don't think there's any providers in Africa, but we're the only provider in the kind of Middle East Gulf region. So if you can email me or just email the Lighthouse and we can give you more information on that. So we had someone say, being positive is the best to solve any problems. We need to be positive. Yeah, you can be positive and also acknowledge suffering. There can be a part of you that feels optimistic and a part of you that feels broken, right? That's really important. We actually do harm when we say, when you don't feel the feeling and you rush yourself, or you almost bypass the feeling and say, I should just be positive. And if you do that to yourself, you're going to do it to others. So we have someone sharing. My wife is pregnant and she is in India currently. I try to keep her positive, but at times she really panics and stresses out on the current situation in India. How can I help her differently to help her divert her mind as I am worried about her pregnancy? I would be honest with her about that and say to her, I'm so worried about you. And a part of me wants to distract you and make sure you're okay because of the baby. But I also want to be supportive of you. Right. And sometimes just being a listening ear may actually be what she needs, right? Is rather than feeling responsible and wanting to fix it, is just validating and empathizing with what is it like for you to be going through this while I'm not there and you are pregnant. So we acknowledge the feeling and then talk to her about what can I do to support you, right? Distracting or pretending like it's not happening can actually do further harm. All right. So I wasn't able to answer, there's some other questions, but I wasn't able to answer everyone's questions. But when you get the email recording, I will also share my email. So if there are any other questions you'd like to personally ask me, you can. But thank you for taking the time to be here today. And I'm holding all of you in my heart and in my thoughts. And this has been a particularly heavy session. So I want you to take some time before you transition into your evening, get up and out of the room that you're in, practice some deep breathing and some intentional self care. You may be thinking about a lot of the things that I've spoken about today, or they may be opening up other things, right? So thank you so much. Please take care of yourselves and have a lovely rest of your weekend. Take care, everyone. Bye.